So it's 6 steps to engage your employees all the time. We chose this particular topic for this month because we seem to be working in quite a few organizations at the moment where there seems to be quite a lot of problems around staff engagement. And, you know, we've run a webinar like this before, and we thought, well, probably worth running it again because we're seeing it everywhere now. And it's interesting because one of the things we're thinking about is, so why is that? You know, what actually has been happening within organizations where so many staff really don't seem engaged in what they're doing? So hence the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And so here we go. So do you want to have positive and engaged people? Do you want to come into work knowing that your people are happy and loving their job? Do you want your staff to take initiative and be empowered? And do you want to find that you have some engaged and some disengaged workers? Obviously, you don't want to have the disengaged workers, but I guess at some stage we can't have everybody engaged all the time. But for those workers who might not be engaged, I guess the question is why? And I often talk about this when I'm speaking at conferences or I'm speaking at forums. What is it that some people become very engaged in their work and really engaged in the organization? And then what is it that makes people essentially just come to work, do the job and go home? And whilst you can't fault for people coming to work and doing the job and go home, what we do know from a lot of the studies is that those people who are engaged in their work, those people who care about what they're doing and have some sense of passion in what they're doing, tend to be more productive and more efficient, and obviously then are more beneficial to the organization. So those are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And of course, this was really scary because when we went into some of the research and we look at the cost of disengaged staff at work, and this is really, really frightening. So the 2016 Gallup State of the Global Workplace Report shows, look at that figure, only 13% of employees, and this was a study worldwide, are engaged. 13%, which means that the people who are working with you or for you, 87% of them are not engaged. And I think that's a really frightening statistic in terms of aspects like productivity, being involved in what they're doing. There's also a term, I'm not sure if you've heard about a term called presenteeism. So it's spelled P-R-E-S-E-N-T, so present, E-E-I-S-M, presenteeism, which is when people come to work and they're present, so they are at work because that's what they're supposed to be doing, but they're not there. You know, I'm sure some of you might have some people who come to work and they do what they have to, but it doesn't seem like they're emotionally involved in their work. It doesn't seem like sometimes that they're even there, barring in their physical body. So that's a really scary thing because we'll talk a little bit about, I call them the walking dead. It's a bit cheeky, but it's a really good analogy if you think about some people coming into work, dragging their bodies in, dragging their bodies around, dragging their bodies home at night. And ultimately, with respect to them, they're not the people that you want in your organization. And so while 78% of business leaders rate retention as in an engagement is important, 26% of them only rate it as urgent. Trends have remained unchanged for over a decade. So whilst the trends remain unchanged of 13%, we see that actually it's the people at the top of the organization who see engagement as something of critical importance. So what's the disconnect then? Where is that, marriage not happy, where the leaders at the top see it so important and relevant to their business, and yet the majority of people don't seem to do it or see it as important enough. So it's a real problem, though, in organizations overall, because what you've got is that you've got an organization that's not being as productive as it can be. You've got an organization, obviously, that's not being as maybe profitable as it could be, or for the NFPs and the NGOs, not getting as much work or outputs or outcomes done in the time that they should be done. And it's a scary thing. Now, whether that's put down to people are stressed or whether that's put down to a really busy lifestyle that we all lead or the pressures of modern day living, it's really interesting. But at the end of the day, whichever way we try and look at it, it's concerning. So just a quick thing about me. There's actually a lot of you on the line whose names I don't recognize today. There's a few of you who I do. There's a lot of you on the line today, actually, which is a really great thing. So I'll just very, very briefly talk about why I do this work. I won't go into too much depth because I'm certainly not the most important part of this webinar. It's rather about you and the people who you find working for you. And in fact, by the way, I might also add that maybe you feel disengaged. You know, it's not necessarily your people, but do you come to work feeling, oh, do I have to do this job again? Do I have to go to that place again? And I think sometimes it's often because we've lost our mojo. But then where's our mojo gone? Have we been doing the job too long? Should we be doing other things? Should we be following our passion? These are all things that we really need to be able to ask ourselves in order to be able to really find passion in the work that we do. So my background is I'm a psychologist by training. I work across 3 different continents. I run a company called Pure Magic International Business Solutions. It's not just me. I've got a wonderful team around me and love working with them. Doing this work for over 25 years and obviously really love what I do. And the firm focus really that I have is on developing CEOs, leaders and teams. My staff run one-day programs for people down the line, but our real kind of ethos at Pure Magic International Business Solutions is to help CEOs and to create highly performing teams in organizations so that, you know, organizations do what they're supposed to do, and that is to be filled with engaged and happy people. I do a lot of coaching and really enjoy my work. We've won a couple of international and national awards. That's not me, that's my team and I. I wouldn't be anywhere without them. And I do some keynote speaking really in Australia and overseas and really enjoy that because I talk a lot about those issues that I'm teaching and talking about on webinars, disengaged people, you know, working for a lousy boss, how to communicate effectively, all those things that are so important to all of us at work. And I work in the Australian and Fiji governments regularly. So that's a little bit about me. Here's me with some of the pictures of people I work with around the world who I love. And really enjoy, I guess, what I enjoy mostly really is the cross-cultural engagement because it just teaches me so much about how people see themselves and life and businesses differently. So let's now then swing into, so what is engagement? I mean, what is this thing called engagement and what is it to you? You know, and I think the important thing is that sometimes we see engagement as different things. So an example is I was working with about 4 or 5 CEOs 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about respect and engagement. And I asked all of them, what does engagement mean to you? And what was really interesting was that for each of them, and there were 5 of them in the room, they all had a different interpretation of what engagement means. And so I thought, well, let's just look at what it is. It's really a complex feeling of loyalty, passion, a feeling that puts an extra step into the lives of an employee, a feeling that drives innovation for products and services, you know, that kind of wants customers to come into the business or to engage with the business and drives the bottom line results, whatever those may be. So it's really that I say it's often about that sense of enthusiasm, that sense of, yes, I want to be here, or that sense of excitement that, wow, I've got a new project on and I'm really enjoying it, I'm really engaged in it. And here's the other thing that I think is important is that you might, for example, even have people who do quite repetitive work, like data capture, and all of those kind of strategies. But I think the important thing is that even though you might have people doing the same work day in, day out, some people really love routine. Somebody get off on routine. So I think it's not always about people being engaged in the work that they do. I often find that engagement also can be engaged in the people with whom they work, engaged with in the, you know, the business that they're in, engaged with the leaders they have. So engagement can be different things to different people, but ultimately it's a sense of enjoyment, passion, and wanting to go that extra mile to be part of something bigger than what they are. And I think that's a really important point that we talk about that before we go further. And do you have that? And it's often a feeling that ripples throughout an organization that obviously drives success. It's quite interesting. I walked into an organization on Monday this week, and we've just been asked to work with the organization. And what was interesting was I went into the reception, and it was the most strange feeling. It was very austere. It was very, like there wasn't a heart in the organization. It was just coldish. I mean, it was a organization that had lots of heating, so it wasn't that you were physically cold, but like it was just very stark. And I didn't find even, for example, that the receptionist who was talking to me was engaged with me. Like, hello, how can I help you? Or could I speak to Mr. Smith, please? Sure, just take a seat. Not how are you today, or, what have you been doing, or no kind of engagement. And it was really interesting because then when I went into the back end behind the receptionist desk, went through the corridors, all of the people were like that as well. There was no kind of mood. There was no kind of fun. It just had a very cold feel. So engagement often is, resulting in or connected to culture. And I think I'm just going to quickly address the leadership here, I'm not sure that all of you on the line today are leaders, but let me just address this. If you do not have a leader who's engaged, you will not have a team who's engaged. And one of the things we need to understand is that to actually have an engaged team, they need to know where they're going. They need to have some strategy or some direction. And if they don't, you often get confusion, you get chaos, and then what you get is people leave or total disengagement. So to engage them, they've got to know where they're going. They've got to have a clear direction. And it sounds so silly to know your people and to greet them. How many organizations do we go into where managers would come into the organization or leaders would come in and not greet their people? A key thing around engagement in any organization and in any country is to greet your people. Now, I'm sure that some of you on the line, and as I said, there's a lot of you might think, oh, do not be ridiculous. I cannot tell you how many times we go into organizations where leaders will come in, they might greet their people, hello, how are you? But there's no engagement in that greeting. It's not like, hi team, how are you? Wonderful to be here today. That's engagement. So it's about really showing your people that they are the center of your world, showing interest in them. Don't engage with them and you won't have engaged people. And it's the little things that matter. It really is. And what's an example? If one of your people, let's say that they've got a sick animal, dog, and you might say, well, what interest is that to me, or what business? And if you say that, you're missing the point. The point is that this employee of yours has got a sick dog. This dog might mean the world to that employee. Do you ever stop and say to the employee, oh, I believe your dog is unwell. I'm really sorry about that. Is there anything I can do to help you? That's engaging as a leader, which then ultimately will get your people engaged in you as a leader. You know why? Because you care. You know why? Because you show you caring. So the way to engage people is to engage in people. Another thing is to pay them properly, pay them for what they're worth. And jobs are often different jobs and et cetera, But, there was a really good example the other day. So I went into an organization to do a training. Now, it was at quite a senior level, and I'm not being critical here. I'm just being observant. It was at a senior level, and everybody at lunchtime had to go and buy their own lunch. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's an incorrect thing to do, but why wouldn't you, even buy the sandwiches? Why wouldn't you treat them? I just felt that they'd paid X amount to get their people trained, but, what it would have cost to have paid for $100 sandwich tray kind of negated a lot of the things that I think they could have done. So it's the little things often. I always say this, be a people person, obviously technically competent, but I would rather you as a leader be better at relationships and not so good at technical things, because the people around you should be good at technical things, as opposed to being a technical guru who's really bad at interpersonal relationships. And then again, I'm talking in a leadership role. It's really critical that the higher up you go in an organization, and to engage your people, you have to have strong relationship skills. It's absolutely critical. And I love this saying by Richard Branson. He's a really interesting leader for me. And when he was asked, how do you look after your customers? He says, I don't look after my customers. I look after my people, and they look after the customer. And I think that's such a valid point. Don't go out of your way to look after the people who are coming into your organization paying you if your people under you who serve the customer aren't happy and are miserable, because ultimately your customer will feel that. Focus all of your effort and energy on your people. And if you do that, your customers will be happy, because you will have a workforce of engaged, happy, and committed people. So that's really something to think about. So let's just talk about some of the problems that we've seen over the last few weeks or months, and, basically some of the ways we've tried to resolve those issues that maybe you would be able to yourselves, or, in the future, looking and thinking about how you engage. And this is this organization I was telling you just now about going into, where they were the sitting dead. So all of them were at their desks, but there was nothing. I don't think they were necessarily rude or ignoring each other, but there was just nothing connecting them, absolutely nothing connecting them. And they came to work like zombies, as I said. But we went into another organization a while ago, and this is a story I'm telling you, where not only were they ignoring or rude to each other, but more importantly, the leader shouted at some of his people. Some of them were in a team meeting, others of them weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And I just said to him afterwards, I'm wondering whether that was necessary. Well, Karen, they don't do what they should do. Well, maybe, but is it necessary to treat them like that? And then, of course, if the leader is rude and ignores them, then they become rude at times and ignore each other. So this is how we have a disengaged team. Others, as I say, walk around like the walking dead, don't greet each other. They're not there. They're presentism. Some clearly don't want to be there. And I want you to think about that. If you've got people who clearly don't want to be there, have a really good chat with them and engage them, or really you don't need them to be there, because you're just paying the walking dead and they're not good for your business. And also, and I think this is a really important point, they're not good for the morale of the people around them. And so when you've got that kind of zombie people, you've got people who are unhappy. Many don't want to go to work, and often the bare minimum gets done. So just remember that a lot of these people are disengaged because they don't have a leader who is engaging them, an organization that engages them. And if you leave them there doing that, you're not going to have high outcomes or high productivity. People have lost their mojo, and you, if you're the leader, need to understand why. Is it the culture? Is it the pay? Is something going on in their lives? Is it you? Is it, your team, you as a team member? Is it you as their leader? You can't just leave people there because your business will suffer. Little contribution from your team members. The other thing, I wrote an article for the international media the other day, and it was such an interesting article that I wrote around the topic of mediocrity. Like, what is mediocrity? Mediocrity is to do things in a mediocre fashion, i.e. average. And there's so many organizations where leaders or team leaders or executives just accept mediocrity. So, for example, what does that mean? Well, obviously it needs, mediocre or average. And an example would be, so I need a report from my staff member by 4 o'clock on Friday the 12th. Let's just say Friday the 12th, 4 o'clock comes, Friday the 12th, 4 o'clock goes. And then on Tuesday, it still hasn't arrived. And I'll say to the CEO, so where is the report? Oh, I'm still waiting. Well, what are you doing about it? Oh, well, it'll come sometime. So in other words, there's an acceptance of mediocrity. So there's an acceptance of disengagement. And as long as you have an acceptance of disengagement at any level, you will get more of it. Eventually, the report came in, and he actually emailed me the report. So the report was quite an important report. Well, there were spelling mistakes all over this report. It was absolutely so badly done, and some of the lines, for example, ran off the page, so the borders weren't sort of sticking on the page, and it was not complete. And I had a long chat with him saying, so what are you going to do about this? He said, oh, well, I've tried for a long time to fix it, and nothing is resolved. So if you accept that and nothing is resolved, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to tell me, you can write it on the chat, box, where is the problem? Who can tell me where the problem is? That's exactly right, Sam. So I've got Sam on the line telling me the problem is in the leadership, because the leadership is allowing disengaged people and mediocre outputs. So we'll talk a little bit about like that later on. The boss does not deal with the problem. So the solutions was how to deal with this. Disengaged people, this is what actually a team leader said to me a couple of weeks ago. Disengaged people are like a cancer to the organization. Why? Because the more you have, the more they grow, the more that's going to become the culture of the organization. And as long as they're left to grow, they're going to destroy the people in the organization over time. So what did we do? We pulled this leadership team together. When you've got disengagement, ladies and gentlemen, generally it starts at the leadership issue, a leadership level. Not always, but if it does, then it's basically where the problem starts. But you can still have like a really motivated team leader who occasionally would have disengaged people. Now, there's still a disconnect. I'd be interested in that. It could be for, as I said, a whole range of things: lack of pay, lack of good working conditions, an environment that's not optimum to good outputs. But essentially, it's got to be dealt with. So on this occasion, we pulled the leadership together, and we talked about what was going on in the organization. We did a brief survey with some of the staff. We ran a focus group, and we actually found out a way forward. This was an organization with a history of disengagement and a history of being allowed to be disengaged and a history of allowed to be just mediocre. So it was also about unifying them as a team, not as separate individuals in silos. We did a leadership program with them, not a long one. I think it was 8 sessions. And we created a social team drawn from all levels down the organization, where there was more engagement, there were new things. I suggested that some of the people were changed into different roles for a change. There was one woman there, believe this or not, who had been doing the same job. Are you ready for this? The same job for 37 years. 37 years she had been doing data entry. Now, firstly, it was done manually when she started her career, and now she was on a computer, which she didn't like. She didn't like the job, but she didn't sort of have the confidence throughout her career, really, to go and get a new one. And management left her in the job for 37 years. And when I spoke to the leadership team, I said to them, so who would be your most disengaged staff member? And they all absolutely agreed it was this woman. But it wasn't really her. It was a leadership issue because they hadn't done anything with her. Absolutely, she could have said, look, I want to be moved, or I want a new challenge. Yes, we've got to also put some responsibility on her. But essentially, 37 years, I was blown away. One of the 3 major issues that we find in organizations is always communication, always inadequate, ineffective communication. Very seldom do we go into organizations where, there's great communication and we know what's going on. In fact, I don't know if any of you are writing down some of the stuff I'm talking about, but one of the things that is not in this webinar, which I'll quickly give you, is that there's 3 major problems in organizations. The first problem generally is inadequate or ineffective leadership, either at the top or down the line. So if you've got inadequate leadership or disengaged leadership, you're going to have trends of that down the company. The second thing that we find is, as I've just said, ineffective or non-existent communication, which leads then to disengaged, conflicting staff members. So inadequate leadership, ineffective communication, disengaged staff, and ongoing conflict. Those are the 3 things we see time and time and time again. So these are the things that we did in the first one, and this is a second example. Obviously, it's not Jane's Floral Stores. I just threw that in. But this organization, very low staff morale. People in teams talking about each other and talking about the leadership, always moaning about the leadership, and in fact being very critical about the leadership, no common direction. Notice that the common direction or lack thereof is a constant problem in teams. Not working together. Well, why would they work together if they don't know where they're going? And if you're going to have a team that's highly performing, they've got to be unified with specific goals and outcomes and time frames and dates, etc. Otherwise, how are they going to be able to know where they're going? We did a staff satisfaction survey, and the results were exceptionally low. I think there were, if my memory serves me correctly, 10% of people in the organization who were vaguely happy. And this is another really interesting thing. In the staff survey, we gave them an open-ended question. So what's one recommendation you would like, to give the CEO of the company? It was anonymous, so they didn't have to give their name, and they also didn't have to give where they work, because otherwise they could, maybe be traced, and, then they wouldn't feel as comfortable giving the honesty. Anyway, one of the comments that came back from 3 different people. It was the same comment, and I checked because they were in different areas, so it wasn't as if they were in the same team, was fire the CEO. And I thought that was so telling. Wasn't a big organization, but the issues were really at the top. So if you've got staff morale that's low, it's often a leadership issue, or it's a culture issue in the organization, or it's an organization where it doesn't feel warm for people to go to, or people are bored with the job. So this was Jane's Floral Stores. Grumpy, disengaged people everywhere. It was awful. So we were called in to resolve this morale issue. We spent time understanding the problem, and there were many of them. And I think this is a very important point, that low morale happens over time. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't happen over a week. Generally, if you're struggling with disengaged people and low morale, I would say you're talking over 6 to 12 months that it starts to build. And I think that's another issue around the solution of low staff morale, is that, or even conflict in a team, is that if you don't address it when it's happening, it's just going to get worse. And a lot of the leaders and the team leaders we've called in to work with, I think, don't necessarily know how to deal with it well. And so we find a lot of the times we're actually teaching people and organizations to have those courageous conversations around, you know, when you do this, it impacts me in this way. So could we try and work out a more, you know, productive way forward? They don't know how to do that. They leave conflicts hoping and praying on their knees it's going to go away. It won't go away. I promise you it won't go away. And the low morale just grows. What we did was we identified key solutions, and one of them was to get the staff involved. Now, one of the beauties of being an external party going into an organization is that you tend to get more honesty from the people who are talking to us. Because if it's done by, you know, somebody in the organization talking to the staff about the issue, often you don't get the honesty, I think, that an external person does, because, you know, we don't have a vested interest, or any external party doesn't have a vested interest in, you know, the day-to-day at the time. We're vested in helping the organization get it right and then leaving it with them in a right way, if you like. So we got some staff involved. We did some staff sessions. Very frank discussions around what they thought was going on. And we then sat around with the executive and some of the staff, and we came up with 5 key strategies to move the organization forward. We worked the charter. Now, the charter is around the way that we behave with each other. So they didn't have a code of conduct. We designed a code of conduct with some executives and staff down the line in the room. And so together we came up with this collective charter, this collective code of conduct. Now, it's really important that you understand how to do this well. Many organizations will say to me, but Karen, we've got one. Okay, so could you tell me what it is? And I'm sure, I mean, there's a lot of you on the line today. If I said, how many of you know your code of conduct off by heart? I can guarantee that the majority of online would not be able to tell me. So when I go into organizations, very often they'll say, well, we've got one. Okay, well, in fact, as recently as Monday, I was working with a community services organization. I said, what's your code of conduct? Oh, we've got one. Oh, that's okay. So what is it? Oh, I'm not sure. All right. So what's on the code of conduct? Oh, something about behaving well together. Okay. So where is the code of conduct? Oh, we got it when we started 15 years ago. I think it's in my drawer, or maybe it's on the HR manager's, you know, filing cabinet. That is meaningless, ladies and gentlemen. It is useless. To use a code of conduct, you've got to use it well, regularly, and also to use it as part of an appraisal system, but you've got to set it up properly where people are actually appraised as a part, you know, how their behavior is. And it's a very, very useful tool. And ultimately, I mean, we were in this organization for over, I think, 8 months, but we raised the skills to an exemplary level. We focused on the relationships that people had and the tasks that they were doing. And ultimately, the whole organization turned around. The staff retention was better. The efficiencies, I think, went up by, I think it was 52%. It was a really great organization to go into because they were ready for some assistance. Oh my gosh, here we go, miserable people. 87% of people at work are unhappy with their bosses or their colleagues. Many are afraid to say or do something, and many get unwell, affects their health. So even those on the line now today, I'm sure that you've had this experience either in your organization or indeed in your own life. People do not leave organizations because of the organizations. People leave organizations because of their boss, because of their leader. And I think the sad thing about this is a lot of leaders get to the top of organizations because technically they're really sound, but when it comes to relationship skills and interpersonal capacity, they struggle. So this organization that I'm thinking about, we're working at the moment, it's a not-for-profit. And I'm thinking about what a great organization, and it's got so much potential. You've got a managing director who's been in the organization, well, I don't know, but I would say over 30 years, right? And this particular leader is 75 years of age. So what you've got is you've got a whole range of people under this person who are really motivated and committed, but losing their mojo because the 75-year-old person is living in yesteryear, rules with a steel iron rod, and people are leaving in their droves. So it's a really sad situation. And where does the issue lie? On this occasion, it lies at the top. But I do want you to think about it's not always at the top, right? It can be down the line. You might have a great leader at the top or senior management, but you can have a middle management person or a team leader who really doesn't do a great job of interrelationship skills and motivating and influencing their people, and they leave. But it's still, at the end of the day, if you've got a team leader where that's happening, then what's the team leader's boss doing about that? And what happens when you've got that? Well, this is a large organization, hospitality organization. They were absolutely run with silos. And I'm sure that you all understand what the silo is, and I'm sure that all of you work in organizations with silos, or maybe silos not everywhere, but silos somewhere. Well, this particular organization, because of their silos, lost their biggest client. So I always talk about a swimming pool. So swimming pools got different lanes. So silos are like departments swimming in their own lane only. So finance is in their lane, HR is in their lane, operations is in their lane, marketing is in their lane, and nobody talks to each other. So this organization, hospitality, which is about customer service and making people count, lost their biggest client because X lane wasn't talking to Y lane. 7 people left the organization due to this at a fairly senior level. And just remember that this didn't happen overnight. It was sort of building. And obviously profitability suffered, the organizational reputation was affected, and it really, really took them a long, long time. 8 months later, the issues were still not addressed. And it was around about this time that we were sort of called in and, can you just help us resolve this issue? Well, that was not before 2 more major clients were lost. And actually, this particular organization was on its knees. It was literally on its knees. And at this stage, we were called into this organization, and I was working with the board, and we were just talking about where the problems lie. Now, it's not in any remit of ours to fire a CEO, and neither would I necessarily recommend that that's ever done. That's not my job. But my job was to look at the leadership and see where the problem was. And it wasn't just the CEO, obviously, but it was the board's decision to fire the CEO and then to employ a CEO who was much more involved with people. So it was interesting that the CEO they employed wasn't great technically, ladies and gentlemen, in hospitality. In fact, he came from another industry, but wow, he was an absolute whiz-bang on relationships. And the organization over time, it took us a while, but the organization over time, we turned around. What did we do? We spoke to staff. We asked them what was going on. We asked them what they thought had to happen for the organization to turn around, and we acted on some of those solutions. Not all, and we involved the people in the answers. We got leadership involved at all levels. And we actually explained and showed the leaders how they had to lead. A lot of them had never ever done leadership training before. You can't expect people to cook or bake a cake if they don't have the ingredients or if they don't know how a cake is baked. You can't expect people to lead well if they don't know how, if they've never been taught. You can't expect somebody to be really great on the computer if they've never been taught. And I think it's a really important point. Where there were behaviors that were acting against their charter, which we did with them, we made them call each other on them. You know, so if somebody came in, for example, in the morning and didn't greet everybody, then the team was given the permission to say, you know, hey, John, good morning, John. How are you, John? John, we have a charter that says we'll talk to each other or at least greet each other in the morning. Now, that really belongs in an organization where there's high trust and there's firm rules around how we behave. And everybody is allowed to call everybody on those behaviors. And what happened was that there was actually a reduction in staff turnover. So a fairly significant reduction in staff turnover, largely because staff were able to have their say. Staff were able to say how they felt about things. Staff were able to, you know, contribute to the future. And then we did a staff satisfaction survey. And it was really fantastic because, as you can see the figures on the screen, we actually tracked the figures. So much more engagement, so much more productivity because we had ironed out a couple of things that they could not iron out. They could not iron out because they didn't have the skills to iron them out firstly, but they were so embroiled in their own stuff and navel gazing that they didn't know what to do. And the sad thing about organizations is that it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you don't have to have disengaged people. And all of these examples I'm giving you essentially are disengaged people. But understand that disengaged people is an outcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the cause of something. I mean, it's a cause in that, you know, Johnny doesn't focus on doing what he's supposed to do, so he doesn't get things done on time. Therefore, that is a problem, and the cause is a disengaged person, yes. But the real effect here is to what is it that causes that person to be disengaged? That's what I'm talking about. So, you know, there's really many ways to engage your people. And I think as I've gone through the presentation so far, I've given you a couple of things that can re-engage your people. But these are 6 key ways. Firstly, to treat them well. I mean, I say this time, I get tired of my own voice, really. I say this time and time again. Treat them well. People will follow you till the ends of the earth. If you are able to treat them well, make them feel valued, and most importantly, make them feel heard. You don't have to adopt all of the suggestions that they come up with, but I tell the story quite often. Probably about 6 months ago, I was working in an organization, and I was walking down a corridor with the CEO, and I was doing some coaching with him. So we were walking down this corridor and towards his office, and there were 2 women coming towards us. So as they came towards us and they were sort of passing us, I said, "Oh, good morning, ladies," and they said, "Oh, good morning." And then I thought to myself, well, that was a bit strange. The CEO didn't sort of greet them, and they were clearly his people because they were in his office, you know, in his office area. So we got into his office and I said to him, let's call him John. John, can you tell me why you didn't greet those 2 women? And he said, which 2 women? I said, well, we've just passed 2 women. He said, no, we didn't. I said, yes, we did. The one had a green dress on and the other one had a black dress on, whatever it was. And he said, oh, I didn't see them. And I said, well, I think that's the problem, John. You don't see your people. Are they invisible to you? Now, I'm just giving you that example because, you know, I don't think that he necessarily didn't treat them well intentionally. He's so living in his own head that he doesn't see them. So I said to him, well, you're not going to get engaged people. You're not going to get the best out of your people if you don't greet them, John. Anyway, that became a focal point of our coaching. And this is an interesting thing, and it's so simple. Ask them about their families, their successes, their challenges. No longer, if you've got a disengaged and unproductive team or person in your team, is it an HR issue? It's never really been an HR issue. It's always been a leadership issue. If you've got people who aren't working well, or let's say that they were working well and suddenly they're not, it's your role to find out what's going on, as opposed to saying, well, Samantha's just a misery gut, so I'm going to send her off to HR. HR's job is not to do this. It's the team's job. Create opportunities for their growth and development within the organization. I mean, as I said earlier, 37 years in the same job. I mean, that's criminal. You know, and I think one of the key things that I find in organizations is if you move people around, you keep them engaged. Even it might be for a 6 month or a year's deployment, to another part of the organization or a sister company. You keep them going. Oh, great, a new opportunity and a new thing that I can be doing. And, wow, I'd really looking forward to it. I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy it so much, but one of the organizations we work with is the Reserve Bank of Fiji. So it's a national icon, it's a reserve bank, but what the governor of the Reserve Bank does very well is that he moves his chief managers around every 6 months. And he'll do that for 6 months, or he might move them around every year. But you might think, well, that's a bit dangerous. No, it's not really, because he's got 2 governors under him who stay, because you've got to be specifically qualified at that level. But the chief managers under them, what he's doing intentionally is to keep their mojo alive, to keep the engagement going. And it really works well. I've been working with them for 10 years, and it's a very engaged organization. So that's a very key tip. And also outside of it, there are opportunities for them to maybe go on as a secondment somewhere, to, go into another role in another organization, even if it's for a couple of months, and maybe get somebody from their organization into yours. I think regularly assess how you can help them grow as employees, having those discussions with them, the ability to be able to talk to them and ask them, what it is that they want to do and where they would like to grow their career. There was a couple of years ago, I'm going to quickly tell you a story that I found so interesting. I had to speak at this conference. It was also in Fiji, but I had to speak in this conference, and it was about, they asked me to talk to them about Gen Y. So it was a finance conference, and they wanted something on Gen Y. And I thought, what am I going to do about Gen Y? Anyway, I went to do some research about Gen Y and why they are important to businesses in this common day age. And obviously it's because, they will take over the future and business succession planning, all that. Yep, we know that. But 2 things came out of it that I thought was really, really interesting. The first thing that came out of it was that Gen Y are not like, for example, I'm a baby boomer. Gen Ys are not like Gen X or baby boomers. In that, a baby boomer is somebody who will work their whole career and then retire at whatever age, 50, 60, whatever it is, and then go on holiday and take it easy. Gen Y don't do that. Gen Y want to work and then play, and then work and then play, and then work and then play. And this is international research, which I thought was so interesting. So one of the things about if you've got younger people is that you've got to make sure that they have opportunities to do different things and have opportunities, not to be bored in their careers. And the second thing that came out of the research I did, which also blew me away, is that Gen Y are less interested in the money that they paid. Of course, it's important, but they're more driven by their career prospects and, wait for this, learning and development. In other words, they are drawn to and will stay in organizations that upskill them, train them, teach them, show them the world, show them how to do things, and they will stay with those organizations that keep them in the organization but learning and moving and being trained all the time. And I thought that was absolutely mind-blowing to me. I'd never thought about it like that. So here you go. Regularly assess them. Lead by example. Encourage them. Praise them when they do things well. And you might say, well, Karen, that's pretty simplistic. Yes, it is. And it is really kind of ground zero stuff. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of organizations don't do it. What I also say when I'm talking about leading by example, and I think this is a really interesting comment, and I use it a lot in my training and my facilitation. If you are a leader, you have lost your right to be invisible. And I think that's a really powerful statement. If you are a leader, you have lost your right to be invisible. And now what does that mean to you, people? I mean, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'll come back to it at the end of the session, hopefully. But if you are a leader, you've lost your right to be invisible. And here I'm saying, move them around into different positions, projects to keep them stimulated and energized. So these are 6 key ways, but I think, that they're key ways that need to be considered. But I think I would add a 7th there and an 8th there is create an organizational culture of achievement of goals and support of each other. In other words, where, we're all in this together, and let's just say you can't do it for the organization, but you can do it for your team. Have a team where people want to come to because we're going to be supported by each other. We've got a boss who really cares for us, who shows us, interest, who gives us time. Create it that you're there obviously encouraging them to reach their goals and praising them when they do. Make it a place where people want to come to work, and make it a place where people love what they do because they've got the best leader in the world. So those really are some of the things. We obviously run leadership and team development programs. We can help in all of these ways, and we do. We run empowering women's programs, so we go into organizations and we teach women how to thrive, and it's not necessarily executive women. It's actually women down the line largely. We run various management and staff one-day programs, and of course we do copious amounts of coaching. Also run some leadership retreats, which I really enjoy because normally go for 2 to 3 days, and we normally do it within an organization. And the reason why I really like those is because if it's a 2 or 3 day retreat, then we can really get into the nitty gritties of leadership theory, but also leadership activities, etc. So that's a little bit about Pure Magic and what we offer. And there's our website, which I'm sure you all know about. Otherwise, how would you be on this? www.puremagicbusiness.com.au. This is, I just threw this in, this gentleman here, he actually was the GM of probably the most beautiful place I have ever worked in my entire life. It's an island called Laucala, and it's spelled Laucala. And it's just the most beautiful place in the world. And he was the actual GM, and I worked with him for a year. But I also love working in, grotty little training rooms wherever we go, and, corporate offices or community-based rooms. That's not a preciousness for me, but he was just a great guy to work for. So what I'm going to do today is to offer you a one-on-one 30-minute session for you. You're welcome to come. It's free. There's no cost involved on this. If you've got something that you want to talk to me about organizationally, or you need to seek some help from or with, really happy to take that for you or to do it with you. There is a time trade, so you just book it, and then what you do is you'll get a time, and then we'll come on, I'll ring you, and we'll have our discussion. But also my sturdy team of MJ and the newly arrived Dwani, welcome Dwani, will send you a link to the time trade, so you'd be very welcome to join me if you would like to. And I really hope that you have had the opportunity to learn something today. And maybe if you've heard it all before, maybe it's just reminded you of what you might not have sort of had at top of mind. And I'm really, really, appreciative of the time that you've spent.